Hey, what is up everyone? So in this video we're talking about Season 14 and just my general thoughts of what we've been able to play so far. So it shouldn't be a shock when I say this to anyone, where we all kind of saw that the launch of Season 14 was pretty messy. I even made a whole video basically talking about why it was so messy, so if you're kind of out of the loop on that, you can check out this video that's linked here. But despite that, I'm having a lot of fun with Season 14. For those of you that are new and maybe haven't heard me talk about this yet, Season 14 is my most anticipated season of the year, and maybe the last few years, honestly. Ever since I got this game, my favorite thing to do has been to tuck and be like a sneaky little pirate. I just kind of like that stealthy type of gameplay in most games, so Season 14 was something that was really appealing to me. Everything from disguises, to the crouching, to hanging on the side of the ships and setting traps and stuff, all of that sounded amazing to me. When we got the update last week, it was a little disappointing that at the last minute they had to pull some features to continue working on them and then release them later on in the season. But we did get some good news out of that. We found out that one of the darts that they hadn't talked about that they mentioned during the preview event wasn't cancelled, it was still coming out and it would just be out later this year. And that feature that I'm referring to is the Mimic Dart, which I'm really excited for that. I think it will really expand what the blowpipe can do, and I'm already pretty impressed with the blowpipe. So I guess that's a good place to start off with, is my thoughts on the blowpipe, because that is one of the features that we were able to get this time with 3 darts currently, and then that 4th dart will be available later on. I really like the blowpipe, however I don't like it for PvP. I really enjoy it when I'm just fighting like regular skeletons or phantoms and stuff. It's been great when doing any of the PvE events, mainly because of the lure dart, and you can use the lure dart to basically make them turn on each other and start fighting each other instead of fighting you, which is super cool. And then the poison dart obviously is pretty good against the PvE enemies. I don't really use the gunpowder dart too often unless there's like a skeleton holding a gunpowder keg or something like that, but it's really those other 2 darts that I use the most, and I really like it. But I have tried to use it in a PvP situation and it just doesn't work out well. When I've used it in a PvP situation, it's either a little bit too slow to compete with the other guns in the game, or the other problem that I have with it is when I'm using a ranged weapon, typically when I'm fighting, it's when I'm in the water. I typically don't use ranged weapons on land too often, and really if I'm on land or on someone's ship fighting, I'm going to be using a blunderbuss or sword. Sometimes I'll use the throwing daggers because those can kind of be an in-between weapon between a melee and a ranged weapon. But the blow dart just doesn't really work for a lot of reasons with PvP for me. When it's underwater, it just doesn't do what I need it to do, because it basically cancels out your dart effect when you hit someone. So it's held back in that way, but I'm still having a lot of fun with it despite it not being really great for PvP. And then we got the other new quote-unquote weapon for this update, which is the grapple gun. And I say quote-unquote because I really don't view this as a weapon, and I actually like this a lot, but I think it needs a lot of changes. First off, I don't think this should be a weapon slot item. One of the things that makes me not want to use it is that it takes up the valuable space of your 2 weapons. So I tried it the other day when I was trying to steal a skeleton fort, and I was using the grapple gun so that I could basically get to the top of the fort and kind of have a bird's eye view, and then I could just sword lunge off of it and be able to go tuck on the person's ship no matter where they were parked at the island, and that worked out pretty well. But the problem was they actually combined this with another change where they made it so that you can't change your weapon on other players' ships. So I would have been fine with that change where you can't change your weapon on other players' ships if the harpoon gun was an equipment item and not a weapon slot item. If it was an equipment item that everyone had access to, I think it'd be perfectly fair, and then it wouldn't really matter if you could change your weapon or not because you already have your 2 weapons already that you would want. So personally, I would really love to see them make this an equipment item, and, I could take it or leave it if they wanted to keep the ammo or not. I think it's fine with the ammo, but I'd also see it being fine without the ammo if they made it an equipment item. If they did make it an equipment item though, they need to make sure that it doesn't do any damage. I know right now you can use it to fight AI enemies and stuff, and then if you fight it with like players, it will pull them towards you and stuff like that. I think the pulling players towards you is probably fine, but just doing damage to AI enemies, probably remove that and then just make it so that if you try to shoot an enemy, maybe you get pulled towards them or something like that. There's a lot of things they could do with it, but this whole time that I've been playing with the grapple gun, it just doesn't make sense to me to make it locked down to be a weapon slot item. I think that really hampers it, and it makes it so that you don't really want to use it as much because it's such a heavy consequence to use it, and it's really just a traversal item. The other thing with the grapple gun, and I might talk about this again in a future video, but they really need like a little thing that indicates if you're going to be able to make it to wherever you're shooting. The ideal thing that I would like to see is like a little transparent dot of like where it's going to land, and then if you don't see that dot, you know that you're not close enough for it to shoot, and if you do see that dot, then you know where it's going to land and you're gonna be able to make it. Because there's so many times when I'm shooting this grapple gun and it looks like it should be able to make it that far, and it doesn't grab anything, and then nothing happens. There's also other times where like it'll work perfectly, where I'll jump right onto the land and stuff, and it actually is really cool, kind of vaults you over the wall wherever you shot it off at. But then there's other times when, like, say the galleon, where the galleon's supposed to be able to work like this, where I'd shoot like above the railing, shoot all the way up there, and then it would just make me fall right down. All of that's pretty weird to me. And I also did find it interesting that you can actually use it to get on a sloop, which they said they basically had locked it down for the sloop, you can't use it at all. But if you shoot the floor of the sloop, it works, as well as if you shoot the wall where the stairs are, you can shoot it and then grab the ladder, which is probably intentional, but they kind of didn't really mention that. So if you wanted to, you can actually use it to board other players' ships. And the situation that I would see it being best used in is if, like, say you're trying to swim up to a ship and then they're a little bit further off and you kind of miss the board, you can shoot the ladder and then you can grab onto the ladder and kind of pull yourself up real quick. And honestly, they probably won't be able to react fast enough. They'll hear the grapple gun, but they won't be able to like get to you in time before you've already climbed up. Just some thoughts with that. I think the grapple gun would be much better received if it was an equipment item and not a weapon slot item. Moving on, we also have the Merfruit, which I actually really like a lot. I think it's well implemented. I was using it a handful of times in that same situation with the skeleton fort. When I was tucked at the top of the fort, I basically waited for the ship to approach, and then I ate the fruit, and then I knew I had a little bit of time to basically let him perk at the island, get off his ship, and then I could sword lunge over and get onto his ship. So that all worked really well, and I like that you can have up to 3 of them and they're independent from your food items, and I think that all worked really well. My only problem with the Merfruit is I had many times when I was fighting in battles and stuff, and I would try to go for one of my regular foods items, and I'd like click the food button and stuff, and that would pop up every time. And if I eat something, then it would switch to that immediately. So I had to like keep clicking the button to skip over it because I didn't want to eat the Merfruit, of course. That was pretty annoying. I wish it was something where like I would go into like a radial menu and choose the Merfruit instead of it just automatically being selected, because the only times when I would want to use it is when I am purposely wanting to use it, not, you know, in the middle of a battle. So those are my thoughts on the Merfruit. I'm pretty happy with it. I know a lot of people are kind of just underwhelmed with that feature and they don't really see the benefit of it, but I see tons of benefit with it because there's been so many times when we've wanted the mermaid to go away, and now we have an option to do that. And I also think it lasts long enough. It doesn't last too long where it's like overpowered, but it also is long enough that you can actually do something interesting with it. And the fact that you can stack up 3 of them, you can basically have it keep going on for a little bit. There's also a lot of them around in the world. I don't know if that's just for right now because they want to make sure everyone tries it and then they'll lower that spawn rate later on in the season, or if that's the way that they intended it to be, because you can really find this everywhere. It's not as hard to find as, say, like the bone collar or something. So other than that, I would say the biggest feature that we got with this update outside of the weapons is the disguises. Now technically, like I've said before, we had the disguise with the barrel hide emote, but these disguises are so much better. They're such a big improvement that it really is a whole new feature, but it does have some limitations. The main limitation that I see is the only reason you'd use one of the chest hide emotes is if you thought that you could basically blend in with your surrounding without them like grabbing you. Because the biggest problem with these emotes is that, like, let's say if you tried to use the chest hide emote inside like a loot pile that they have on their ship and you're just trying to blend in, the moment that they come and interact with any of their treasure, you're exposed. They talked about during the preview event, and I think it's really needed for this feature to really work out well, is the ability for other players to be able to pick you up when you're in your disguise as a chest. Some people think that's overpowered. I don't really think it is, because you can still do the same kind of scenarios of slashing your sword or shooting a gun or a blunder bomb or whatever you want at anything that you think is a disguise, and it will expose them. So being able to pick them up and carry them is not really a deal breaker in my mind. I do think the disguises are really cool, and I have some ideas of how to do some fun things with the chest disguises in particular. But overall, if you can't pick them up, I think it really limits your ability to use them for much in the game. But I think that covers most of the main features of the season. All of you already know that I really like the Plunder Pass and the Season Pass that we got this season, and if you haven't seen those videos, I'll leave those linked here as well. But otherwise, I've just been having a good time completing the accommodations. I think the accommodations this time are pretty well done. Obviously, some of them are locked because of the features that weren't able to make it in. But I really like that the disguises were kind of like a two-parter accommodation unlock. So it kind of rewarded having played for a while now, because basically you'd have like one old accommodation paired with a new accommodation. And most players that have been playing for, I would say, over a year or so, probably have a majority of these accommodations already done. And then if you don't, you probably only have a little bit left to do for the old accommodations. And then you have the new accommodations to go for. So I really like the way they set that up. I do think that the accommodations that they had this time for the new stuff was a bit of a grind. However, you can basically cheat your way through the whole thing if you get an alliance. I got lucky when I was just kind of trying to do this naturally and just find ships to tuck on and stuff. For example, the one where you have to, like, in a disguise, walk around a player's ship for however long of a distance. That obviously one took a long time. Same with the crouching one. I got lucky because I was just able to find some nice players in the game, and we all just kind of worked together to do the accommodations and stuff. And then we had a ton of fun afterwards because we went and did the skeleton ships. We all boarded the skeleton ship together and started fighting the skeleton and like trying to do the accommodation there. And then we all went and tried to do like a 7-person tuck with our chest disguises on that ship that was at Reaper's hideout. We got caught pretty easily, but it was still a lot of fun, and you just see all like the little chests that are like moving around on the ship and everything. It reminds me of like what makes the game fun, where really anything is possible. With a game like, say, Fortnite, you know what you're kind of going to get every game that you play. Basically every game you play, you see a player, you go and kill them, you try to win the game. With Sea of Thieves, it could have been a situation where I just tried to board their ship and then try to do my accommodations without being seen. Or it could be like the situation that I had where we become friends, we help each other do some accommodations, and then we actually started playing together and go and do other things. So I had a pretty positive experience with doing the accommodations where I actually made some friends on the seas. But I know a lot of other players are probably going to have some frustrations trying to do this because of how much of a grind these accommodations are. Now, I kind of did the thing that I don't like that players do when we get the new seasons. Obviously, you can play the game however you want, but I see a lot of players, whenever a new season comes out, they try to rush through and like complete everything that that season has to offer. And then, you know, within that first week, they're like, well, we finished everything, now there's no content, this game sucks, it's dead game, blah, blah, blah. I typically try to just go slowly through the game. Like, you'll look at my accommodations page, there's so much stuff that's not finished because I just go at a very slow pace with these kind of like grindy type of accommodations. This season, however, the disguises are a big motivator for me to try to complete the stuff pretty fast. So now I've basically completed everything but the Chest of Fortune disguise that's available now. There's a few that aren't available to unlock right now. I basically got everything else unlocked. So I definitely grinded this weekend doing stuff like the Poisonous Pirate accommodation where you had to like go poison enemies and that kind of stuff. So I kind of did the thing that I don't like that other players do because then they complain about it afterwards. And I'm not going to complain. I think we got a good amount of content here. But I do see that probably being the sentiment coming up within the next week or two, that Season 14 just doesn't have any content to enjoy. What I would say though, on a broader scale of thought, there's essentially two types of updates for a season that we get in Sea of Thieves. We either get the one that's like a giant content update or like a few different giant content updates. For example, we had with Season 6, the Sea Forts and Legend of the Veil being added, or we had last season with the Burning Blade and the Skeleton Camps. That's what I would say is like a big content update season. Then we have seasons like this one or Season 12 where it's a lot of different new tools that are supposed to kind of expand the possibilities of what you can do in the game. But it doesn't really add anything new in particular to do. While I've said multiple times that this was my most anticipated season and why I really like this, I think it would be good for Sea of Thieves to look at maybe changing up their formula for this. What I'm kind of noticing is that they try to kind of go back and forth like a 1-for-1. even though last year was kind of a weird case. So like we have like Season 12, which is kind of like that toolbox expansion update, and then we have Season 13, which is like the big content update, and then we're back to a toolbox update. Season 15 is probably going to be a big content update, and I think kind of the back and forth on paper sounds good, but I think the game would work better if we had 2 seasons back to back that were like big content updates, and then you have like a season afterwards that's like the toolbox update like what we got this season. For me personally, I just don't think like 1 season's enough to bring in enough like big major content that's new for most of the year. And I think if you had 2 of them back to back, then that's enough to basically last the player for the 3rd season, where it's like a toolbox expansion where you're still playing the old content but with some new tools. Even before Season 14 came out, I was seeing tons of comments of people saying like they don't really care for the Bring Blade, they don't like the Skull Siren song, the skeleton camps were underwhelming, and they want some new content. They don't like these toolbox updates. And I understand that perspective. If this wasn't an update that was targeted at me, I probably would be less favorable with Season 14. But this update really is for a player like me, so I'm a little bit more biased in favor of this season. But if Sea of Thieves changed their update structure and had like 2 major content updates for seasons back to back, and then the 3rd season each time was like the toolbox update, I think that would be a really good formula to keep the game going for a long time. But those are some of my early thoughts with Season 14. I've got other ideas that I want to talk about with Season 14, but I'm going to hold those off for another video that I'm working on. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments below of like, what do you think about Season 14 so far, and what's your favorite feature that was added? That's all I have for this video. If you enjoyed, it'd be great if you like and subscribed. And until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all later. Bye y'all.